Hello everyone, Hacksaw Hunter here and welcome to an impressions video on the quest battles that I got hands on at EGX Rezzed this year, which were the Sword of Unholy Power, the Vampire Counts versus the Greenskins, and the Amulet of Sea Gold, which was Empire versus the Vampire Counts. So I will be talking about my thoughts about the vampires, their units, the battle, thoughts about the Empire, the units in the battle as well, and then a little bit on the Chaos versus Vampire Siege that was shown at a Siege AI presentation, talk a bit about that, and then we'll get into the final thoughts of this video. So, jumping straight into vampires first. Well, with the vampires, you're going to have to be playing aggressive due to the new ranged units. As you know, most likely the core vampire units are slow, and it kind of accelerates your need to press the attack, especially in that quest battle when there's a lot of enemy ranged units on the battlefield. And we'll might as well start off with some units as well. So the zombies, they're pretty slow, like I mentioned before, units being slow. Zombies are the slowest, so you need to get them engaged as quickly as you can. But basically, they're useless. I'm sure you'll know zombies aren't very powerful, so you need to use them to lock down the enemy, basically, for your better units to flank in classic hammer and anvil tactics, really. Talking about the skeletons, which are also in the battle, they're quite similar to the zombies in the speed, but they also have shields, so they can defend a little bit better against the enemy, and they're a little bit more powerful in melee as well. So in early games, you imagine early campaign battles, should I say, there's going to be a lot of zombies and skeletons that you're going to be using, the basic units. So probably do a mix and try and use as much cavalry and beast units as you can. Onto probably the best unit the vampire counts are going to have, melee, a graveguard. These ones are just awesome. On the battle, they kept basically chewing through the enemy as if they were butter, really, even potentially against some of the heavier greenskin units. Onto the actual monstrous units, you've got the direwolves and the fellbats. I've grouped these guys together because they have kind of similar playstyles. They are pretty much the glass cannons of the Vampire Count's army. They're very, very effective at fast flanking across the battlefield, targeting those ever so pesky artillery units and skirmishers, but leaving them in combat too long is probably a bad idea. And if they're too far away from the Necromancer or Legendary Lord or whatever hero unit you've got, they will start to crumble a lot easier. That uncrumbling is the Warhammer Vampire Count equivalent of morale, so you got to keep them close to your generals if possible, and don't leave them engaged in combat for too long. Onto some of the cavalry, you got the Black Knights, which are excellent cavalry units, and they were more than a match for the Greenskin's Goblin Wolf Riders that were used against you in that battle. So yeah, they are very good at taking out the cavalry and being able to move on. And the Lances version of the Black Knights were very good at their charge bonus as well. Onto maybe more of the more important features of that quest battle is magic. The actual goal of the battle was to kill or rout 4 magic users, the shamans of the Greenskins. So you have Manfred, who has both the Law of Vampires and the Law of Death, which have a lot of spells that you can use. So, at least personally, I had to keep pausing the battle because there's so many spells to use, and I personally don't know the spells very well. So that might be happening to you guys as well when you're fighting the battle. You might need to pause and keep looking at your magic until you get kind of a good idea of what does what, because you can raise dead and it's very useful to use in flanking, but the range you can raise dead is quite small. You can't have Manfred in the bottom left corner of the map and raise dead behind the enemy lines that are in the top right corner of the map. They're quite a small radius, which is good because you could just cheat and spawn zombies behind enemy walls and whatnot. Although it will be interesting to see if you can actually spawn zombies if Manfred is at the bottom of the wall and you can put them on top or behind. I will have to find out if that's the case when it comes out. I'd imagine not, but we'll see. But yeah, the battle itself, the kind of scenario is the Greenskins are attempting to stop you from reaching the Pillar of Bone, a site where the winds of magic converge and basically Manfred wants to use all that magical power and the necromantic energy created by killing those shamans and all the Greenskin forces to forge this sort of unholy power. Well, as not a Warhammer lore person myself, I don't know too much about that, but I assume in Total War Warhammer it's going to be a very nice weapon to have with Manfred, as it'll increase his attack power and probably a few other little bits as well, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, the quest battles in general, the set pieces, so you can expect the AI to be guided, I wouldn't say locked into certain tactics, but they tend to do certain things like flanking from different sides, kind of, the normal thing to expect from more of a challenging battle. But they did try to adapt to my strategies by splitting my forces or focusing just on one flank alone in multiple playthroughs of the battle. So I wouldn't say it's too easy to fight as long as you're good at the game, so to speak. But I can't give you all a good opinion on the full battle AI because, like I said, the AI is guided a little bit in these battles. Not fully scripted per se, but yeah. So I can't say if they are gonna be good battle AI compared. But we'll talk a little bit more about AI later on with the Siege AI talk that was done by one of the programmers at EGX Resd. So yeah, on to Manfred himself. He's pretty much versatile. He's a very, very powerful magic user with all the spells of the Law of Vampires and Law of Death, but also quite good in melee. You can have him casting spells and splitting skulls as much as you like. He's quite a good legendary lord, and it would certainly be my choice if I'm playing the vampire counts. Yeah, so that's pretty much my roundup of the vampires and that battle. I'm going to move on to the Empire now. So, kind of the Empire in general, the more your traditional Total War faction, in that they have regular human units and some beasts, but their main feature, at least in the Amulet of Sea Gold quest battle, is the artillery that you bring, because they give you 3 different types of artillery that have 3 very different types of engagement and usefulness, I suppose. You've got mortars, great cannons, Hellstorm rocket batteries to counter the vampire army. So the mortars, they're kind of most useful in being able to indirect fire over terrain, walls. You can fire them out of line of sight easily. They're quite useful, but they are probably a lower tier artillery unit that you probably don't want to be bringing to late tier battles if you've got the likes of the Hellstorm rocket batteries or the more advanced artillery units. The great cannons, they're kind of your traditional legacy artillery that will mostly excel at slowing down blobs of enemy units, blowing down city walls, and also new to Warhammer, obviously, is the large enemies, the giants, the Ragnaroks, the beasts, the Vargeists, Vargals, that are probably not going to be fond of having a great cannonball hitting them in the face, so they're going to be a little easier to target. And my personal favourite is the Hellstorm rocket batteries, because they were very, very effective at speeding up the vampires crumbling and breaking their morale with the explosive and fiery rain of death, especially when the enemy vampire army in the Amulet of Sea Gold had Cairn Wraiths, which as ethereal units have a 75% buff against enemy melee units because they do less damage against them. So fire, they're very susceptible to fire, so having the Hellstorm rocket batteries was quite pivotal to being able to rout those Cairn Wraiths before they chew through your units, because onto the spearmen, they were quite susceptible to routing and breaking because they got overwhelmed by zombies, by Graveguard, by even Black Knights and all the bad things that come with that. These units are probably your tier 1 units that you can get straight away in the battles, and my advice would be to leave them in the dust as soon as possible because they did break far too easily and they couldn't hold the line for long. But thankfully, in the battle, you had swordsmen, which was still probably going to be more of an early tier unit, maybe mid tier. They can hold against the enemy for longer, but they're still quite susceptible to breaking and routing, especially against those graveyard units. They are not friendly, but yeah, they're quite good at holding the enemy for your cavalry, the Empire's strong suit, as long as artillery to hit the enemy, while you keep them away from your ranged units. And on to potentially the best melee units, the greatswords. They're going to be the melee infantry unit that you want to use as much as possible, because these guys can tank the enemy and also melee the enemy into submission. There was one unit in the quest battle, and pretty much every time I played it, and even people that played it around me, they always exceeded 200 kills, and that was even in a mid-decent battle. Like, I've seen them doing 300-400 easily. They are very, very good units, and they could potentially be rebalanced, but I think Warhammer's going to have more of the units that you're going to want to go for, like the Black Knight's Graveguard for the vampires, great swords, and potentially some of the monstrous cavalry that the Empire have, all to get the most kills and are the most tanky. But I kind of felt that was going to be the case when Warhammer was announced and when people were talking about it. I've been pretty much listening to all of Overkill Total War's faction videos. I definitely suggest that you go over to look at that. It's been where I've taken most of my inspiration for the lore and how it's going to fit into Total War, really. But yes, carrying on, you got your cavalry, and in this battle you had Reiksguard, which were more than capable of fighting toe-to-toe with Black Knights. I'd say that they were pretty evenly matched, but you can easily get overwhelmed by the Black Knights with the fact that your Reiksguard can break and rout, where the Black Knights will only crumble and they can keep on the assault while you are trying to kill them. So it's quite a bit of give and take with the Reiksguard. They're very good, but you've also got the monstrous cavalry, which I briefly mentioned, the Demogryph Knights, because they have a lower entity count to the unit, which basically means they have lower unit numbers. They are insanely powerful and strong, those Demogryph Knights, and with lances, their charge bonus is pretty much through the roof. They're very, very, very good, but obviously they would be quite susceptible to losses through multiple campaigns on the campaign map, just theory. If you are fighting battle after battle, these guys don't have a large amount of unit numbers. I can't quite remember the exact count they have off the top of my head in that battle, but it was probably about a quarter of the Reiksguard. They were quite a small unit. Carrying on, you've got the Missile Cavalry in this battle, which were Pistoliers and Outriders. Now, the most important feature of the Pistoliers and Outriders is they have Vanguard deployment, which is the Warhammer equivalent to guerrilla deployment, which is absolutely perfect to be able to harass the enemy, especially in battles with a lot of units that are slow but quite worrying. Like, the zombies may not do much, but if you have loads and loads of zombies and the potential for the enemy to flank you, you want to get them away from your lines as much as possible. So yeah, I use them to harass a lot of the enemy units, and they're still quite powerful and fast, being quick to reload, especially the Pistoliers. And on to the legendary lord for this battle, and he is Balthazar Gelt, who is a caster with the Law of Metal. Unlike the legendary lord for the vampires, Manfred von Karstein, Balthazar isn't very useful in melee, and if you attempt to do so, he will rout and break, which happened to me in the few attempts that I did. But yes, he didn't die, but yeah, he could not engage enemy units for long. I'd definitely keep him back, used to try and keep up the morale of your units, which morale is actually leadership for the regular factions in Warhammer. But he's got a lot of spells which are mostly focused on buffing and debuffing armour. So buffing your armour of your units, debuffing the enemy units in attack. Very, very, very useful to kind of turn the tide, say if your units aren't quite as powerful as the enemy. if you reduce their effectiveness, you can probably come out on top. So it's quite an interesting legendary lord, but personally I would probably end up with Karl Franz, as I like to have a general that can attack just as well as keep the morale or leadership up in the army. Okay, now I'm going to cover a little bit of the Chaos versus Vampire Siege that was attached alongside the Siege AI presentation at EGX Rezzed. So there was a AI developer or programmer session detailing the Siege AI logic, programming, and this was similar to the GDC presentation that you may have had a look at before, a few weeks ago I think it was. But this primarily included prefab settlements, which have been a little bit of a point of contention over the past couple of weeks after the gameplay that has been released from a couple of YouTubers that got some access to these quest battles early and a little bit of the campaign. But yeah, what the pros of this new prefabbing system will include primarily is basically to make the AI better, because the AI behaviour in settlements and pathfinding has always been a little bit iffy at best, mostly okay, but sometimes they get caught or they don't have optimal paths, so it's a bit, you can win the battles because the AI isn't working very well in the siege, which is trying to get combated by this new prefab system, because they can use the same prefab across all races and the AI will work as perfectly as it would in any of the other battles. As long as Creative Assembly are creating quite a few prefabs, so there's a little bit more variety, it should be okay, completely fine in my eyes. But if the prefab number is quite small, you are going to get a little bit more repetition, but this is not unusual for the Total War series, because you will have fought battles, and I know I have, where you've gone across Europe and you've seen the siege settlements, and it's just a part of the game. I'm sure if they could, they would make unique settlements for every single settlement on the map. But it's just not quite possible, and at least with prefabs they can make sure the AI is working the best it can in those settlements. It allows them to quickly reuse assets and test how the AI is interacting with these prefabs. So yeah, that's my kind of thoughts and feelings over that Siege AI prefab kind of thing, because I think that it can make the game a lot better in the end, so I won't be too upset if there's not as much variety, because I really think that having better AI trumps having very unique settlements. But even the prefab settlements between races look very different. The visual quality and the detail is insane, even though it's essentially the same city layout. Anyway, one thing that was mentioned at the talk though, which is quite interesting and intriguing to me, was that there's going to be multiple AI battle managers. And before, it was mentioned in the little presentation that there was only one AI battle manager that was covering the AI tactics and behaviour in the previous titles. But in Warhammer, there's multiple battle managers now, which means that they can do multiple tactics during the same siege battle and the same time. So they can be calculating different tactics, working together with the overall battle managers to essentially deliver better siege AI. And they only mentioned the siege AI up to the walls, so all the assault tactics, the gate assault, the wall assault, breaching walls kind of tactics, where the AI is set targets and points to go for that are used with the prefab system to kind of say, alright, these are where you could attack, and the AI is encouraged to go down those lanes. But I think that having that is going to be quite a lot better, because before, siege battles are just like, you just wait for them to get to the walls, they generally do the same thing, and then that's it. But they should be trying to execute more tactics and more behaviours to keep you busy and challenged, which is going to be quite useful, I think. But also one thing that seems to be new, and has been highlighted several times now in multiple videos and talks, that there's now reserves on the battlefield, that they don't just needlessly charge to the walls and wait for an opportunity for you to kill them by missile attacks or generally whittle them down. They'll have reserves at the back of the battle, which will be able to be assigned to those battle tactics that I mentioned. Say a gate assault, there's a breach in the walls, they need to go in, or they need to go up ladders or siege towers that have reached the walls as their new entry points to the map, the city, should I say. So the reserves will be kept back and utilised better later on in the battle, but also what was mentioned, say a siege tower was destroyed, that unit will end up retreating back towards the reserves to be reassigned to a different tactic. So you'll have the AI shifting its battle tactics throughout the battle rather than being committed to one tactic which might fail. So yeah, it's definitely something that has me intrigued to see in full bloom as how the AI has changed in this new title that is coming out. So onto my general thoughts and summary. Something that I'm sure you will all be happy to know is performance-wise, they have all but confirmed that the preview footage that they have been recording on has been running on, say, an i7 470K or equivalent CPU. This was confirmed to me by Albicum. He told me that basically the machines that were running the battles at the event were that exact CPU, which is mine, so I'm quite happy to hear that it runs on the high and ultra very well. And also that the Nvidia GTX 980s, maybe even the Ti version, have been used to try and push out those top graphics, but I don't exactly think that this is going to be too problem if you don't have the highest stuff, because what Al told me on top of that was the fact that more time has been allocated to the graphical engineers to improve the performance, especially over multiple cores, which is something that has been sorely needed for the newer Total War titles, because before they only used like one core and it was very, very CPU intensive. So hopefully spreading load will improve the performance, and the performance in general should be a lot better from that, just simply allocating more time for the graphical people to get the game settings and overall performance better on multiple systems. That is the hope anyway. Yeah, so the quest battles in general I thought were quite challenging and quite fun puzzles, as they've been coined. And it'll kind of add that extra zest to the campaign with some of the roleplay elements that are going to be new to Total War Warhammer. It's going to be so you can connect a little bit more with the Legendary Lord, and the quest battles are completely optional. You don't even have to do them if you don't want, but the benefits of doing them is you're going to be able to acquire steeds, magical items, weapons and so on that will improve your general and improve your ability to ramp across the campaign map and conquer. So onto something a little bit different. The UI is very customizable. You can choose to have as much information on the screen or as little as you want, while be able to change it on the fly in battle, so you don't have to go to the pause menu to change the UI elements. You can do it with tick boxes during the battle, and I think you hold space for that menu to come up, but don't quote me on that. Also, something has been quite a contention, the missile trails. Well, if you don't like them, they can be turned off. However, I would personally like to have a slider that would change the missile effect size, but in the end I'm not too bothered, because I do have the option to turn it off if I want to have more cinematic battles, or have it turned on if I want to be able to see where I'm engaging a little bit better, because with guns and crossbows and all sorts of different range units, you now want to know who's fighting what. In general, I am really looking forward to the release of Warhammer Total War, because everything I've heard and seen so far has me optimistic for the release. There's a little bits of snags and how's this going to work, but I think until we get full hands-on on release, we can't really make that true judgment from what they've shown us. It's quite a small portion of the game. So we'll see. But I personally do believe it could be the best release for a long time, and probably the most interesting Total War title today. Now, don't get me wrong, I do love my historical Total War games, but I do think the series has been long overdue. A little bit of an invigorating shake-up of the formula, and this seems to be it. And obviously I mentioned in this video about the performance. I've been talked to about having more time for the graphics to be tweaked and better for performance for everybody. So it does seem to be potentially the best release of a Total War game for a very long time. So that is my hopes and my thoughts and impressions of those two battles, the two factions, and kind of other bits in general together. Quite a long kind of talk. I mean, hopefully I've not rambled on too much. But yes, I do thank you for watching. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments and discussions and counterpoints that you'd like to say. And yep, I will be doing a campaign let's play on a release of Warhammer, one on YouTube and one on Twitch, so please do subscribe to me on YouTube and follow me on Twitch. Obviously the links will all be in the description as usual. I've been Hacksaw Hunter. Bye bye.